Cool. All right. Well, we'll get started, and then I'll just kind of keep an eye as people are coming in. Cool. Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Gresto. Welcome to the Antibody, a quarantine reading series, part of LitHub's virtual book channel. I'm coming to you on a humid summer evening from my writing studio in Brooklyn. This is the 15th week of Antibody readings. And the news today has been as tumultuous and overwhelming as it's been every single week since the series began. But I am so grateful to the many of you here who have been here before. Even just seeing your names week to week has just been a beautiful bit of hope and stability and optimism in this challenging and uncertain time. For those of you who are new, welcome. As I was mentioning before we're coming in, there's 5 more episodes, and then the series is going to go on hiatus. I'm not sure for how long yet, but I feel very grateful for you, the audience, and for all of the many great talents that have graced our screens. And tonight, I'm really grateful because we have 3 more amazing artists of the written word. I'm really excited. Britt Bennett is here, Michele Filgate is here, and Lynn Steger Strong is here. And I hope that you will join me in taking a deep breath and settling your body back to appreciate their artistry. For now, everyone, your mic should be on mute, and I ask that you please keep your mic on mute. We don't have a stage, but we do have a microphone, and we're going to honor that while the authors read to us for a little bit. At the end of the event, there will be time for a Q&A, so be ready for that. But the chat is public, and so you can show your appreciation for the authors, and I ask, please show your appreciation for the authors. So please get your keys clicking and your fingers tapping as we welcome our first author of the evening, Michele Filgate. Michele is a contributing editor at Literary Hub and the editor of a critically acclaimed anthology based on her long reads essay, What My Mother and I Don't Talk About, which was published by Simon & Schuster. Currently, Michele is an MFA student at NYU, where she is the recipient of the Stein Fellowship. Her work has appeared in Long Reads, The Washington Post, The Los Angeles Times, The Paris Review Daily, Tin House, and other publications. She teaches creative writing at NYU, the Sackett Street Writers Workshop, Catapult, and Stanford Continuing Studies, and is the founder of the Red Ink series, which is now online. And if you haven't checked it out, you should, because it's awesome. In 2016, Brooklyn Magazine named her one of the 100 most influential people in Brooklyn culture. And she's also a former board member of the National Book Critics Circle. Please welcome Michele Filgate. Hi, Michele.
Hello, Brian. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm so honored to read with Lynn and Brit tonight. Lynn actually has a gorgeous essay in my anthology, so we've done a bunch of events together already for the book. And I figured that tonight I would be brave and read something I've never read before, since I've read from the essay so many times. I'm going to read for the very first time a short story that I've been working on at NYU. So I'm going to read part of it. And here we go. Do I just get started? All right.
You've got it. The mic is yours.
Perfect. Okay. So it's called A Friend. Joy waits for the moment when the bartender is distracted and helps herself to a handful of olives. The bar is crowded because it's the weekend after Thanksgiving and people are desperate for a break from their families. A man who smells like a walking ashtray elbows Joy in the side as he pushes his way to the front. She glares at him and then focuses her attention on Arthur, facing her back to the stranger. The date is going well and confidence is on her side. Her purple scarf and hat fall off of the stool, and Arthur leans forward to get them, slamming his head underneath the counter on his way back up. Joy orders 2 glasses of Prosecco. To our clumsiness, she says, and they clink glasses. Arthur's knee grazes against hers. Above them on a huge flat screen TV, the Grinch tries to stuff a Christmas tree up a chimney, ornaments and all. So, how often do you do this? She asks. What, smash my head into things or go on dates with pretty girls? Arthur grins. Joy blushes. She avoids the mirror that takes up a good chunk of the wall in front of them. She doesn't want a glimpse of her disheveled bun and her firefighter red lipstick and her frayed black t-shirt that shows a good amount, just the right amount, of cleavage. She discreetly unbuttons the top of her jeans. Tight jeans are her nemesis. "You're the third date I've been on today, to be perfectly honest," Arthur says, "but I saved the best for last." He winks and runs his hand through his shoulder-length brown hair. Arthur is in a band. Of course he's in a band. She can't seem to stop dating musicians. "I'm so busy between playing shows and recording that I need to squeeze all of my dates into a single day." "All of your dates?" she asks. Popular man. Ha, more like a picky man. He tears the paper coaster into tiny pieces, arranging them in a circular pattern. Joy excuses herself and goes to the restroom. When she returns, Arthur has moved on from turning his coaster into confetti and is staring at a younger woman standing near the door. She's supermodel thin, 3 inches taller than Joy, and holding a squirming puppy in her arms. "I can't tell if you're checking out the girl or the puppy," Joy says, surprised at herself for being so direct. "Definitely the puppy." Arthur slides off the stool and she follows him. Up close, Joy stares at the floppy velvet ears, the black and tan pattern that resemble a Rottweiler's. "This is Odin," the woman says, offering the dog to her. Joy buries her face in the dog's fur. She breathes in. She notices the woman's obscenely white teeth, her camel cashmere peacoat, a whiff of a cloying floral perfume. "Our dog died 6 months ago," Arthur announces, and Joy is slightly startled at this bold lie. Why make up a relationship and a dead dog? But she can play this game if he wants. She imagines living in a 1-bedroom in Greenpoint with Arthur, getting annoyed at him for always leaving the toilet seat up. Their golden retriever Marvin gulping toilet water like it was LaCroix on a hot July day. Marvin snuggled up between them at night, his paw draped over Joy's back, his hind legs pushing against Arthur's. Marvin on his birthday, wearing a party hat. Arthur taking a photo of the two of them out in McCarran Park during magic hour when the sky called to mind the pink of Marvin's tongue, saving it as the wallpaper on his phone, looking at it before he went on stage to play a show. Marvin and Joy, his tiny, perfect family. "Yeah, it was just awful losing Marvin," Joy says, and Arthur seems perplexed. "It was worse than our breakup when our dog died," the girl says, and it's then that Joy realizes this isn't a stranger Arthur was checking out, and this definitely isn't about the puppy. What an idiot she has been. "We shared custody for a while, but Odin is a love and he's all mine. I picked him out myself. I really wanted a dog that matched the color of my favorite purse," the woman tells her. Joy tightens her grip around Odin, a protective hold. The woman stares at Joy as if for the first time. "I'm Daphne, by the way." Joy squeezes Odin's ear a little too hard, distracted by Daphne's superficial confession. It's exactly at that moment that Odin decides to bite Joy's thumb. She extracts her finger from the puppy's jaw and stares at 2 tiny red dots that glisten in the dimly lit bar. On the wall next to her is the iconic black and white photo of Marilyn Monroe standing over a subway grate, her white dress puffed up like an elegant bird, revealing just the right amount of thigh and underwear. She resists the urge to wipe her thumb on Marilyn's dress. "Odin, sorry about that. He's still teething," Daphne says as she rips Odin away from her. She doesn't seem sorry. Joy fake smiles. "It's okay." What kind of a monster would get mad at a puppy, she asks herself. "Daphne, this is my friend, Joy," he says. Just like that. Friend with a capital F. A friend won't get laid tonight. A friend won't care that the friend's ex-girlfriend just happened to show up at the same bar. And a friend certainly wouldn't steal this puppy. But she's not a friend, is she? Somehow the night continues. "We were supposed to meet on Martha's Vineyard, but Arthur has always been a bit scatterbrained, and he thought I said Nantucket. He took the ferry to the wrong island," Daphne says as she rolls her eyes. Men, right? They are still standing near the bar, still talking, drinking a round of flat beer Arthur ordered, and they've moved on to Arthur and Daphne's origin story. Joy swirls her beer around again and again, making a whirlpool in the pint glass. Daphne has somehow become even more beautiful on closer inspection. Her eyes are a glowing green, almost neon green. We both lived in Boston at the time, and I thought it would be fun to do something kind of crazy for our first date. So I suggested going to an island for the day. Oh, were you Arthur's third day of the date too? Joy asks. Maybe he had to meet another girl on Nantucket before making his way over to you. Daphne laughs and places her hand on Arthur's arm. She has long, elegant fingers and a bright orange manicure. Several of her nails are chipped. Arthur was lucky enough to get a date with me, let alone another woman on the same day. Joy decides she will let this comment slide, even though she feels like throwing her beer in Daphne's stupid, pretty face. Daphne keeps touching Arthur, and this possessive gesture brings out an animal reaction in her. I get it, bitch. He's yours. I think Odin needs to pee, Joy says, and offers to take him outside. She heads to her bar stool and zips up her coffee-stained LL Bean jacket, grabs her purse, takes the last sip of her Prosecco, and finishes off Arthur's for good measure, and makes her way to the door. In the corner, Arthur and Daphne have found an empty booth. Daphne keeps laughing and showing off her perfect teeth. Come on, Odin, let's go for a walk. Good boy. Her cheeks sting from the cold, so pink that they look like a 6-year-old gave her a makeover. She realizes she left her scarf and hat inside, but to enter the bar would be to admit defeat. Joy is tired of everything. She is tired of no longer getting catcalled on the street, of a slew of bad or awful or just tedious internet dates, of men who ask her what she wants to do with her life. Not end up homeless isn't a popular answer, apparently, especially in New York City where everyone judges you by what your ambitions are. She is tired of the stupid fucking fluorescent light that flickers over her work computer. Her boss said he'd fix it 3 months ago. Of being expected to order a cake and remember individual allergies and preferences on her coworkers' birthdays. Mary Sue doesn't eat gluten, but not because she has an intolerance or celiac disease. It's for health reasons. She's tired of entering numbers into spreadsheets, so many spreadsheets. She's tired of her father always suggesting that she date his next door neighbor, a divorced balding man in his 50s with the ugliest, yellowest teeth she's ever seen and excessive flatulence. His house always smells of stale farts. And tired of everyone wanting her to do something and someone. She's tired of wanting that too. As soon as they are out of the sight line of the bar, she picks Odin up and speed walks toward the Metropolitan Avenue subway stop. She pulls a wrinkled New Yorker tote bag out of her purse, the same one everyone gets for subscribing to the magazine, and places him in it. He stares up at her with a mournful expression, almost disappointed in her. The same look her ex, Matt, gave her the night he let her know about Christina. She wants to have kids, Matt had told her as they watched the Jim Carrey version of How the Grinch Stole Christmas. The live-action version is so much better than the cartoon, he had insisted that evening. Yet another thing they didn't have in common. I'm sick of waiting for you. She stared at the crushed pillow on their love seat and picked some stray feathers out of it. One feather for he loves me, one feather for he loves me not. No more feathers after that. The spiked eggnog Matt had made suddenly tasted sickeningly sweet. She watched Max paw the red felt ball off of his snout. He made a terrible reindeer. Max, that's what I'll call you, she whispers to the puppy in the tote bag. It's a fitting name for him. Much better than Odin. And I'm going to stop there. But thank you.
Thank you, Michele. Thank you. Guys, show some love and appreciation for Michele in the chat, please. Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, that makes me want to cuddle my dog so bad right now. Also, I mean, like, what a warning sign. Someone who likes the Grinch Before Christmas, the like live action version, as opposed to the
bad news. Yeah. The story goes on after that, but yeah, I thought that was a good stopping point. So
thank you so much. And you guys in the audience out there, I'm putting a link here. Oh, okay, Britt, we've got to have words later. I'm putting a link here to Michele's anthology, What My Mother and I Don't Talk About, which will be out soon in paperback. So you can pre-order a copy from bookshop.org. It's a fantastic anthology. So please support our authors and help support independent bookstores all over America through Bookshop, which is really cool. Cool. Thank you again, Michele.
Thank you.
Moving right along, our next reader of the evening is Lynn Steger Strong. Lynn's first novel, Hold Still, was released by Liveright Norton in 2016. Her nonfiction has been published by Guernica, Los Angeles Review of Books, Elle.com, Catapult, LitHub, and other publications. She teaches both fiction and nonfiction writing at Columbia University, Farfield University, and the Pratt Institute. And her latest novel, Want, is out from Henry Holt next week. Congratulations on that, Lynn, and all the great buzz that this book has been getting. Please, everyone, welcome, show some love and appreciation for Lynn in the chat there. Welcome, Lynn Steger Strong.
Thank you, Brian, for having me. And this doesn't stop feeling weird, but I'm excited to be here. And I, like Michele, am going to read, at least for the first time from this part of the book, which is just the beginning minus a prologue. I made some cuts, but here we go. I have an actual book, which I realized as Michele was reading, I should have done a screen. But my alarm goes off at 4:30 every weekday morning, and I keep my phone lodged between the slatted stairs that lead up to the lofted bed my husband built us in the closet we use as a bedroom, so that I'm not able to press snooze. I climb down in the dark and find the phone, which has often fallen. I turn off the alarm and put on my bra and tights and shirt and shoes and gloves and headband, grab my keys and phone and lock the door behind me. I run miles and miles before anyone wakes up. By 6:15, I've showered and dressed and started to make breakfast. Sometimes my husband slips into the shower while the children are still asleep and we have sex. It's cold in the bathroom. He bends me over the railing of the back ledge. He pushes me up against the grimy tiles, holds my leg up. My body is outside the halo of hot water and my skin models and I shiver and am cold as I wait for him to come. I take 2 trains to get to work and neither of them runs well. I wait sometimes 3 minutes for the first, sometimes 15. Sometimes the train's right there, doors already open as I pass through the turnstile and I run, my bags flapping against my hip and back up the stairs and through the crowd of people, slipping through the closing doors. I often get no seat and stand, trying not to grab hold of close by arms or shoulders as the train turns hard, stops short. I try to read a book but fall asleep if I'm sitting and almost fall over if I stand. I hold it open, not turning any pages, both my bags clutched between my calves and ankles, planting my feet firmly on the ground. Good morning, team, says the Google chat they made me install on my phone when I started at this job 6 months ago. Looking forward to a joyfully driven professional day. On Twitter, the world is ending. A nuclear war is threatening. Ice caps are melting. Kids at school are shooting other kids at school. At work, I wear collared shirts and cardigans and black wool dress pants and clip a set of keys around my neck, and no one makes much mention of the world outside. Once a week, more sometimes, when I get a seat on the train and am tired enough not to acknowledge what I'm doing, I check Sasha's mostly dormant Facebook. She has college photos and a handful from right after. A girl with whom she roomed her sophomore year, whom I knew vaguely, reposts the same handful of old photos every couple years. We were so young, this girl says every time that it comes up. Look at us. 20-year-old Sasha stares at me over and over, too much how I remember. Defiant, careless posture, perfect face, her 2 big eyes. I check her hardly ever active Twitter. 3 years ago, she retweeted a New Yorker article on Miami Beach and climate change. I check her sister's and her mother's Facebooks. Sometimes she's in their pictures, to be sure that she's still there. At work, 2 blocks north of the subway in a big brick building through 2 large, heavy doors, I walk past the scanners where the kids stand in line to have their bodies and their books checked. I tip my coffee to the security guards and the kids I know. A handful of them call out my last name. I take attendance on the live attendance tracker and talk to my 2 homeroom teachers, who are my only friends at work. They are Black women and I'm white. For a long time, they didn't trust me until one day they decided they could trust me, and still sometimes it seems like they might not. We are all older than our other colleagues. One of my 2 homeroom teachers is the only other person in this building with a kid. They didn't trust me because they shouldn't trust me, because there's so much I don't know or understand about them, because I sometimes lie to them about my upbringing to make my life seem more like theirs. I think they trust me mostly because we love the kids we teach. We check the various apps and Google calendars where the deliverables for the day are laid out, and we post the morning PowerPoint about the new lateness policy, about the new rules concerning the dress code. Only black socks are permitted, shirts must be tucked in at all times, and belts worn, shoes must be black, and sneakers aren't allowed. I teach 2 classes in the morning, both junior literature and language, and my job's completely fine as long as I am with my students. We read Hamlet and they raise their hands. I've been given a curriculum, rote and predictable, test prep focused, but I ignore it. We read and we have conversations. They do group work, stand up together, and give presentations on chart paper. My students are all black and brown kids, underserved, reduced, or free lunch charter school kids. They are still daily by the shoddy, half-assed education that they're getting every day at this place from grown-ups who mostly look like me, being underserved. My co-teacher is 24 and does not know how to be a teacher. He also does not know how to interact with other humans or how to define the word soliloquy. He stands in the back of the room and tries to give kids infractions, and I tell him not to or take them away later, logging onto the system on my computer and disappearing the detentions he's doled out. He crosses his arms over his chest and tells kids to sit up or push their chairs in. Mr. D, they call him instead of his full name, and he shakes his head. That's not my name, he says, and the kids laugh and half-hearted say they're sorry. A few minutes later, they call him Mr. D again. Mr. D, they say, I have to pee this minute. He clenches his fists. But really, they say, it's an emergency, Mr. D. Not now, he says. I pop my head up from the student paper that I'm reading, trying to tell whoever said this without talking that they should stop it, but also, if they don't stop it, I will understand. Go, I say to the kid who still has to use to the bathroom. Mr. D stands quiet, his jaw tighter, eyes set on me, and no one speaks to him for the rest of class. At lunch, my 2 co-homeroom teachers sit with me and we talk shit about our coworkers instead of reminding the kids to clean up after themselves and not swear, like we've been asked to do. We talk about the 24-year-olds, my co-teacher, and the others, 23 or 26, but all the same. The young ones, almost all white, anxious, energetic, their sentences sound like questions at the end. They seem scared of their own students. They don't know how to teach and no one's tried to help them. They're held to standards they can't meet based on test scores and class averages, and they panic and dole out the material in the exact rote way that we're meant not to. If and when their methods do not work, they blame the kids. They're not awful, these young teachers. I talk about them because I'm manipulative and unfair. Because I've learned the best way to bond with colleagues is to be galvanized against other colleagues, against bosses, and I'm desperate to ally myself with my 2 co-homeroom teachers instead. These 24-year-olds, I've sat with some of them in one of the classrooms we use as an office when no one's using it for teaching. They're so young, and if they were my students, they'd be some of my favorites. We've had coffee, sat together during training. They're sweet and talk earnestly about social justice, but they're my colleagues, not my students, and they can't see and don't seem to want to see all the ways their good intentions aren't worth much. After lunch, there is a break, and I download and print out all my pay stubs because I need them to finish filing for bankruptcy. How's it going? Asks one of the math teachers as I use the printer in the teacher workroom. The math teacher is also 24 and wears a tie, a dark blue jacket, and a crisp white shirt with the collar buttoned every day. He has bright white teeth and perfect posture, too much facial hair. I check to make sure I have all of my pay stubs as he looks over my shoulder, and I turn my body so he knows I don't want him to look. Joyfully driven, I say. We share the building with 5 other schools, and the track team has nowhere to practice, so they practice in the hallways during the last 4 periods of the day. I leave the teacher workroom and wait, pressed against the hall wall as kids fly by over hurdles. A girl's toe catches on the bottom of a hurdle, and it bangs against the hard, dark floor, and she falls hands flat on the cold tile, and she doesn't scream. Our older daughter's school calls 3 hours before the workday's over. They never remember that they're supposed to call my husband, who is home during the week and takes care of them while I'm at work. Our daughter got a bead stuck in her nose. I must come pick her up and take her to a doctor who can get it out. I almost tell the nurse to call my husband, then instead I say I'll be right there and message my boss that I have to leave. My co-homeroom teacher and I are the only people on the staff with kids, and usually when I say kids to any of my other coworkers, people's eyes glaze over and they get antsy and uncomfortable, and I get out of things. I'm not yet on the subway platform when our daughter's school calls back to say they got the bead out. The other nurse, who had been on her lunch break, held her hand over our daughter's face, her thumb pressed hard against her unobstructed nostril, and blew into our daughter's mouth until the bead popped out. So we don't need you, says the woman. She's back in class, she says, all good. But I'm already out and my coat's on and I keep walking. I skip the subway. When I was very young and single without children, I used to walk the city for days. I head north and west and walk into the Guggenheim. There is a retrospective of stark lines and colors. I can't remember the last time I've been in a museum on a weekday, and I walk very slowly up the corkscrew path and am alone and quiet. I look a long time at each painting. It feels like what I imagine people feel like when they imagine whatever God they might believe in standing close to them. That's it.
Thank you so much, Lynn.
Sure.
Thank you, everyone. Please show Lynn some love in the chat, please. That was awesome. I'm sure if you guys have are, I don't know, out there paying attention to book news or book reviews or anything like that, you're seeing the all the great and well-deserved acclaim that Lynn's new novel Want is getting. It's so good, so great to hear you read that, and also to have a moment to remember museums, which is really lovely. I'm putting a link here to pre-order Lynn's novel, which at this point is pubbing on Tuesday. So, you know, order it next week's, right? So order it.
Yeah,
and
please.
It'll be on its way, probably. That's really amazing. And yes, Beth, thanks for mentioning Lynn's newsletter. Lynn, if you want to put a link in, go for it. I forgot to prepare that in advance, but Lynn's newsletter is so good, and you definitely should sign up and check it out. I think that some of the most interesting and kind of form expanding nonfiction that I've read this year has been in Lynn's newsletters, which is really cool. So yeah, please give it a read. Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you, Brian.
Of course. All right, our final reader for the night, so excited, is Britt Bennett. Born and raised in Southern California, Britt graduated from Stanford University and later earned her MFA in fiction at the University of Michigan, where she won a Hopwood Award in short fiction, as well as the 2014 Hurston Wright Award for college writers. Sorry, I lost my place. So sorry, Britt. A 5 under 5 honoree, her work is featured in The New Yorker, The Paris Review, Jezebel, and more. And her first novel, The Mothers, was a New York Times bestseller. Her latest novel, I'm sure you're aware of, is The Vanishing Half, which is also just doing so wonderfully and getting so much acclaim. And just yesterday it was announced that HBO picked up The Vanishing Half for a series. So please welcome and hearty congratulations to Britt Bennett. Hi, Britt.
Hi. Hi, everybody. Thank you, everybody.
The microphone is yours.
Thank you. Thanks, Brian. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you, Lynn and Michele, for reading. I don't remember the last time I've been to a reading, so this was great. So I'm just going to read a little bit from the first chapter of The Vanishing Half. I think all you need to know really is that the context is that Desiree is from this town called Mallard in Louisiana, which is a town full of very light-skinned Black people. When they were teenagers, she and her identical twin sister Stella escaped to New Orleans. And while in the city, her sister Stella just disappears, and you realize that she has passed for white, and she has kind of vanished into the ether. So after that happens, Desiree picks up and she moves to Washington, D.C. which is where she meets her husband. And that's the section I'm going to read right now, is that section where she moves to DC after her sister has left her. So yeah, this is from chapter 1 of The Vanishing Half. In DC, Desiree Veen had learned to read fingerprints. She had never even known that this was something you could learn until the spring of 1956, when walking down Canal Street, she spotted a flyer tacked outside a bakery window announcing that the federal government was hiring. She'd paused in the doorway, staring at the poster. Stella had been gone 6 months then, time falling in a slow, steady drip. She would forget sometimes, as strange as it sounded. She would hear a funny joke on the streetcar or pass a friend they once knew, and she would turn to tell Stella, hey, did you, before remembering that she was gone, that she had left Desiree for the first time ever alone. And yet, even after 6 months, Desiree still held out hope. Stella would call. She would send a letter. But each evening, she groped inside the empty mailbox and waited beside a phone that refused to ring. Stella had gone on to craft a new life without her in it, and Desiree was miserable living in the city where Stella abandoned her. So she'd written down the number from the yellow flyer pressed against the bakery window. And when she went to the recruitment office as soon as she got off work. The recruiter, skeptical that she'd find anyone of good character in that whole city, was surprised by the neat young woman sitting in front of her. She glanced at her application, stumbling where the girl had marked colored. Then she tapped her pen on the box labeled hometown. Mallard, she said. I've never heard of that place. It's just a little town, Desiree said, north of here. Mr. Hoover loves small towns. The best folks come from small towns, he always says. Well, Desiree said, Mallard is as small town as it gets. In DC, she tried to bury her grief. She rented a room from the other colored woman in the fingerprinting department, Roberta Thomas. More a basement than a room, actually. Dark and windowless, but clean, and most importantly, affordable. It ain't much, Roberta told her on her first day of work. If you really need a place. She'd offered tentatively, as if she were hoping Desiree might turn her down. She was exhausted, 3 children in all, and honestly, Desiree just seemed like another to take care of. But she pitied the girl, barely 18, alone in a new city, so the basement it was, a single bed, a dresser, the radiator rattling her to sleep each night. Desiree told herself that she was starting over, but she thought of Stella even more now, wondering what she would make of the city. She'd left New Orleans to escape the memory of her, but she still couldn't fall asleep without rolling over to feel for Stella in bed beside her. At the bureau, Desiree learned arches and loops and whirls, a radial loop flowing toward the thumb versus an ulnar loop flowing toward the pinky, a central pocket loop whirl from a double loop whirl, a young finger from an old one whose ridges were worn down with age. She could identify one person out of a million by studying a ridge, its width, shape, pores, contour, breaks, and creases. On her desk each morning, fingerprints lifted from stolen cars and bullet casings, broken windows and door handles and knives. She processed the fingerprints of anti-war protesters and identified the remains of dead soldiers arriving home wedged on dry ice. She was studying fingerprints lifted from a stolen gun the first time Sam Winston walked past. He wore a lavender tie with a matching silk handkerchief, and she was shocked by the brightness of the tie and the boldness of the jet black brother who'd found the nerve to wear it. Later, when she saw him eating lunch with the other attorneys, she turned to Roberta and said, I didn't know there were colored prosecutors. Roberta snorted. Of course there is, she said. This ain't that down-poke town you come from. Roberta had never heard of Mallard. Nobody outside of St. Landry Parish had. And when Desiree told Sam, he struggled to even imagine it. You're jiving, he said. A whole town of folks as light as you? He invited her to lunch one afternoon, leaning over her cubicle after he'd stopped by to ask about a set of fingerprints. Later, he told her that he hadn't been so desperate about those prints after all. He just wanted to find a reason to introduce himself. Now they were sitting in the National Arboretum, watching ducks glide over the pond. Light or even, she said, thinking about Mrs. Fontenot, who'd always boasted that her children were the color of clabber. Sam laughed. Well, you got to bring me down there sometime, he said. I got to see this light-skinned city for myself. But he was only flirting. He was born in Ohio and had never ventured south of Virginia. His mother had wanted to send him to Morehouse, but no, he was a Buckeye back before all the dormitories desegregated. He'd sat in classrooms where white professors refused to answer his questions. He'd scraped piss yellow snow off his windshield each winter, dated light girls who would not hold his hand in public. Northern racism, he knew. That Southern kind you could keep. As far as he was concerned, his folks had escaped the South for a reason, and who was he to question their judgment? Those rednecks probably wouldn't even let him come home, he always joked. He might go down to visit and wind up chopping cotton. You wouldn't like Mallard, she told him. Why not? Because they find you down there, color struck. That's why I left. Not exactly, although she wanted him to believe that she was nothing like the place she'd come from. She wanted him to believe anything beside the truth, that she was only young and bored and she'd dragged her sister to a city where she'd lost herself. He was quiet a minute, considering this. Then he tilted the bag of breadcrumbs toward her. He'd been ripping up the crust of his sandwich so she could feed the ducks, the type of subtle gallantry she would learn to love about him. She smiled, dipping her hand inside. She told him that she had never been with a man like him before, but the truth was she had never really been with a man at all. So she was surprised and delighted by every little thing he did. Sam escorting her into restaurants with white tablecloths and ornate silverware. Sam inviting her to the theater, surprising her with tickets to see Ella Fitzgerald. When he brought her home the first time, she'd wandered around his bachelor's apartment, amazed by his neat linens, his color-coded wardrobe, his big, spacious bed. She'd nearly cried when she'd returned to Roberta's basement after that. He would never again offer to visit home with her. She would never ask him to. She'd told him in the beginning that she hated Mallard. I don't believe you, he said. They were lying in his bed, listening to the rain. What's there to believe? I told you how I feel. Negroes always love our hometowns, he said. Even though we're always from the worst places, only white folks got the freedom to hate home. He was raised in the projects of Cleveland, and he loved that city with the fierceness of someone who hadn't been given much to love. She had only been given a town she had always wanted to escape, and a mother who'd made it clear that she was not welcomed back. She hadn't told Sam about Stella yet. It seemed like another thing about Mallard that he wouldn't understand. But as rain splattered against the metal fire escape, she turned toward him and said that she had a twin sister who decided to become someone else. She'll get tired of all that play acting, he said. Bet she comes running home feeling foolish. You're way too sweet for anyone to stay away. He kissed her forehead, and she held him tighter, his heart thumping against her ear. This was back in the beginning, before his hands curled into fists, before he called her uppity yellow bitch, or crazy as your sister, or off thinking you white, back when she'd found herself starting to trust him. Many years later, when her eyesight would begin to fade, she would blame the years she'd spent squinting at sheets of fingerprints and marking their ridges. Roberta told her once that soon the entire fingerprinting system would be operated by machines. The Japanese were already testing out the technology. But how could a machine study our fingerprint better than the trained eye? Desiree saw patterns that most people couldn't. She could read a person's life off his fingertips. During training, she'd practiced reading her own fingerprints, those intricate designs that marked her as unique. Stella had a scar on her left index finger from when she'd cut herself with a knife, one of many ways that their fingerprints were different. Sometimes who you were came down to the small things. Thanks.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much, Britt. Whew. I just take a moment there. You guys want to show some love for Britt?
Thanks, people.
Comments, Aaron?
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So amazing. I'm going to put a link here to order a copy of Britt Bennett's latest novel, The Vanishing Half. That was really cool. Thank you. I warned you guys at the beginning that there's going to be question and opportunity to ask authors questions. So I do have one to start, which actually was emailed in before the event, which is awesome. But if you've got a question that you'd like to ask, please just, you can use the chat and I can either pass you the mic or you can just write it in the chat, whatever you are most comfortable with. But yeah, I got a question for you guys. It comes from Kim, in Vermont. Kim emailed, she was curious about the zeitgeist and how you feel your work fits into the current moment. Clearly, you wrote your work without knowing what the past few months would be like. But especially for Britt and Lynn and Michele, I have a version of this for you. But like your books seem to have been celebrated, are being celebrated for feeling very now and speaking to today. Yeah, how do you feel your work kind of fitting into the current moment? And was that something that you were thinking about? I mean, I guess obviously not able to predict exactly where we're at, but were you thinking about how it was going to kind of like land in the culture, or was that not at all on your mind as you were sitting at your desk and writing? Who wants it?
Britt, you want to go first?
Sure, I'll go first.
I feel like you've got a lot of practice, so I'm going to let you take it. And
I've received a version of this question a lot, I think, because of the themes of my book. I think, for me, it was a strange experience because, I started working on this book 2014, 2015. None of us or nobody publishing in this year certainly imagined they would be publishing into a pandemic. And not only did I not anticipate that, but I also did not anticipate that my book would be published at a moment in which people wanted to buy books about race. So for me, it's been a very surreal feeling. It's something I feel kind of ambivalent about, to be honest. I think that the themes in this book, I think, would have been relevant anytime, but the audience intrigue would not have been the same. Like, that's what I think has changed. To think about, to write a book that's about racial identity or that's about racism, unfortunately, is always relevant in this country. So, but I think that intrigue on behalf of audiences, that's what's new. I don't think that when I was writing, I thought about it, that I was writing a book into the zeitgeist. In fact, I worried that I was doing the opposite. I actually worried that I was kind of looking away from sort of the horrors of the current moment, kind of writing this book in the wake of, the 2016 election. There was a part of me that felt like I was almost looking away from the present by writing a book that's set in the past. So I definitely did not expect this book to be framed as timely in any way. But I think that it's, this idea of these sort of echoes of history that are continuing to echo, and that's the way in which people are reading it in this moment. Those are things that, obviously happen outside of your control when you're publishing a book. But I'm glad that people have gravitated towards this book in this moment. I'm glad that people are, telling me that it's challenging their thoughts about identity and their thoughts about sort of these binaries that we sometimes want to lean into about identity. So I'm grateful for that response. I definitely think it's very surreal and entirely unexpected, at least for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lynn, go ahead.
No, I mean, I love the idea that Britt's book is historical, because I feel like that's relevant insofar as I don't really believe in cataclysms, like even pandemics. Like, look at New Zealand. Like, a pandemic doesn't have to be a cataclysm. It feels like that here because we have deeply broken systems, and the pandemic was the thing that sort of took the last thread of a shred of holding things together and shattered it. And I sort of feel the same thing about the conversation around race. Like, right? I mean, if you've been paying attention, none of this is new, but now it is more present in most people's lives than it was before. So yeah, with regard to zeitgeist, I similarly have never really thought of myself as someone who would even know how to write a zeitgeisty book, not least because I'm sort of an obsessive and I can only write the book that I can write. I'm glad that more conversations are being had about the things that I hope my book is talking about with regard to the ways things are broken. I wish it didn't have to get to this point for those conversations to be had.
And Michele, I mean, a different kind of version of this for you, I guess, which, because your anthology correct me if I'm wrong, but it kind of came out as like kind of Me Too was really at a crest, and it had a similar, it felt, at least from the outside, of having a similar kind of thing. It felt like the anthology of people talking about specifically secrets, or that they've kept from their mothers, or that their mother kept from them, and coming out at a time when women were talking about secrets and talking about these kind of hidden messages and coming forward and sharing their stories.
Yeah, it did. The essay was supposed to originally be published in around Thanksgiving in 2017. And then the Me Too movement took off in October with the Weinstein story breaking. And Sari Botten at Long Reads was like, we're moving this essay up. It's relevant now. So as soon as my essay was published, which is about my stepfather abusing me and the fracture that causes in my relationship with my mom, I heard from so many people who didn't just respond to the essay itself, but to the title of my essay, which is what my mother and I don't talk about. And I really do think that this anthology, it needed to be published in the particular moment it was in. It's very much of the moment, because we had finally reached this tipping point where people were ready to speak. I mean, not to say that people weren't speaking out before. Writers have been breaking silences for many, many, many years. But I think that my anthology definitely speaks to the particular moment we're in with Me Too, where people are finally feeling like there's a support system for them to tell these stories. That said, not every essay in my book is about abuse or related to Me Too. There are tons of different relationships between mother and daughter and mother and son, and explored in my book. And I wanted to make sure that it covered kind of a wide spectrum of that. So, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's so interesting to think about the way that our culture works and writers work in solitude, but also thinking a lot and looking out and, reflecting. And it's so interesting when those two forces just kind of come together at like lightning in a bottle.
Yeah.
A question here, again, so from Danielle Lazarin, a former reader of the series and a wonderful short story author and writer. Danielle has a question specifically for Britt, but I think this is one that we could hear from everyone. Britt, Danielle is curious to know about your choice of POV in your novel, which she says she really admires. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Thank you. Thanks, Danielle. Yeah, I think for me, when I originally thought about point of view of this book, I originally thought of it, I don't know if anyone here has read the T.R.U. Jones book, Silver Sparrow, which I love. And I originally kind of thought about it in the vein of that book, which is also a book about sisters. And that book is structured, it's kind of, there's an A story and there's a B story, and the story is kind of split right down the middle. And I originally thought it was going to do that. I thought there would be a Desiree story, that would be the first part, and a Stella story, that would be the second part, and that would be the book. It got more complicated, as I think is the best way of describing the process of writing a novel, because I became more interested in the lives of these other characters. I became interested in the lives of their daughters. I became interested in the lives of these men that enter their lives, and kind of ducking into their heads a little bit. So I realized that I didn't want to just sort of limit the point of view to the sisters. I wanted to think about their mother. I wanted to have these kind of brief glimpses into a lot of these other characters. So, I think of the sort of voice I imagine of the novel is almost kind of the voice of the town. There is, I think, sort of a judginess to the narrator that I love. I love a judgy narrator. And I just wanted to think of that narrator being somebody that will like rove throughout the book, and think of the kind of narration of the book almost, instead of thinking about it kind of bifurcated in the way that I originally thought, thinking of it almost as like a baton that's being passed from character to character as you're moving through different periods of time and different locations in the book. And to me, that felt like a really organic way to tell this story that is about a fractured family. So it felt like the narration needed to reflect that fracturing. It didn't feel like it was one story. It felt like it was all of these different stories. So one, I think I wanted to speak to that. But two, I also think that that's the way that we kind of experience life where you meet somebody and then maybe you don't think about them and then they pop back up 10 years later and you're like, what have you been up to in those 10 years? And then you find out. So I like stories that do that as a reader. So those were some of the things that I was thinking about as I was trying to figure out the POV of the book. Yeah, thanks.
It's very cool. I love hearing when like the world became so like intriguing to you that you just kept following and following. It's really cool. Lynn, similar question, but actually, thank you to Laura here, Laura Spence-Ash, for making it even more particular for you in terms of want. She writes that the book moves incredibly well, due in part to the first person voice and the use of present tense. Can you talk a little bit about those kind of craft choices in terms of the book's narrative POV?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of my favorite sensations of reading is the feeling that it's like secret sharing. And I think that I wanted the reader to feel the whole time like someone was sort of desperately whispering in their ears all of the things that were happening with, and also a pretty judgy narrator. So it's, you know, I hope that it's thrilling in that way, right? Like it's a first person, she's sort of documenting an experience, and maybe even more than in her head, you're in this space of her brain where like she's disclosing more than she would anywhere else.
Yeah, no, it definitely has that kind of urgency to it of someone just sharing the stuff that's on their heart. It's really effective. Michele, how about you when you're working on fiction? I mean, I feel like I've talked with you more about your essays, so I'm curious to know like what in terms of like finding the voice of the story, do you do a lot of free writing? Do you think about this kind of stuff in advance? Do you just let it kind of come over, to you over time?
A lot of it is trial and error, but for this particular story, I was challenging myself to not write from the first person because I've been a creative nonfiction writer for years, while also wanting to write fiction. And now I'm getting my MFA in fiction at NYU. And I found that I kept wanting to write short stories that are based on my own life. My life would find its way in there again and again. So I felt like, okay, if I try writing something that is not from the first person, maybe I can distance myself enough to really allow myself to imagine and create here. So that's what I did with this particular story. And I felt like I needed that distance to access the main character. Yeah.
Well, and the dog as a character is such a wonderful touch as well.
Okay.
I have one final question, and I guess to start with Britt, which is that you, because similar to you're actually like a few weeks ahead of the experience that Lynn is about to be in, which is that it's your second book. It's coming out in the middle of a pandemic, and I guess I'm just curious to know, just from the experience of having a sophomore novel that's coming out now, what has that been like compared to the first time around? I know publishing, that window when a book comes out can be so intense for an author. Is it feel more intense at this point? Does it feel less intense? Do you like doing digital events over live events? Like what's it been like?
I will say there is something to the not having to go anywhere to do the digital event, set your phone notification for like half an hour before, and that's all you need to kind of lean into it. There is something nice about that. The digital events have been more fun than I expected. I thought going into it, I just thought like, oh God, I'm just gonna be talking at my computer and, alone in my apartment, and that's gonna be strange. But it's been fun to see all of the people who've popped up. The thing that I didn't, I think, anticipate about digital events is that truly anyone who's ever met you could be at any event, which is not really the feeling of an in-person event, because you're like, well, they don't live there, but I had my 11th grade English teacher pop up to one of my events, which was really sweet. And so that's a really nice thing, I think, about the digital event. I think the accessibility is really nice, and being able to partner. I mean, this is, an all Brooklyn reading, but we could be anywhere in the world doing this event. So that's something I think that's nice. I think for me, there's just a strangeness of this experience as far as, again, being alone in my apartment in quarantine, and then having this this book kind of have this outside life and this life that's so apart from me, and that feeling that distance, which has been fun, but also very strange and disorienting. Because on one hand, I feel like I've never been more isolated, but on the other hand, I feel like I've never been more exposed. And there's something strange about experiencing that. I think that experience of publishing a book and putting thoughts into the world, and then they're feeling like that there's that real gap because you don't have that kind of human face-to-face interaction of going to a bookstore. So I think that's been the strangest thing. But I think that I've been really encouraged by how the publishing industry has adapted. I don't think of this as necessarily the most the most adaptable industry always. But to see people rally so quickly when quarantine first hit, and finding ways to do these digital events, and to see that readers are everywhere and will find you everywhere, that's been something I think that's great. And I think that Lynn has to look forward to.
That's really cool. Lynn, how are you doing? You gotta.
I'm not there yet. I guess the version of it is with kids, there's the perks there and then the negatives, which is to say I just got to I got to read my kids their bedtime stories tonight, which feels like a real treat always, almost always, to be honest, but a good amount of time. But then also before this, I was doing an interview, and there were 3 demands for snacks and 1 just sort of person popping back and forth behind me for a good period of time, because my husband is at work 12 hours a day. So yeah, I mean, pluses and minuses. But like Britt said, it's been the pluses have been surprising and kind of cool, just in terms of the weird ways that this does feel more intimate. Like, I've seen a good amount of your homes now, and you've seen mine, and that feels kind of cool. And everyone who's spoken to me for an interview has met my children. So I don't know, I think books are really intimate. So the ways that this is intimate too feels exciting. I think books are intimate. So the ways that this is isolating and limiting also feels isolating and limiting.
Wonderfully put. And yeah, as a host, I will say that it's always a pleasure to get a tiny little screen window into everyone's space or apartment and see how they've arranged everything. Michele, do you have events planned for the paperback launch of the anthology? Or
I believe that I have a launch at Bookstore Magic in August. So I'm still figuring out the lineup, but yeah, it'll be in August. I should know this off the top of my head. I can tell you right now. I can look at the calendar, but. And then I'm doing more of my red ink panels in the fall, probably online, because I don't see us being in person anytime soon. My paperback book launch is supposed to be August 13th, digitally on Zoom. So, but yeah, I have this series Red Ink that some of you know about already. That is women writers. I organize a curated panel discussion around a certain topic. So the next one for that will be in September.
Very cool. All right, August 13th, marking the calendar. And everybody, Britt and Lynn also still have other digital events coming up. So find them online. All of the authors here tonight are on Twitter and very active on Twitter. So please find them and please give them all a warm thank you again. Thank you guys so much for doing this, for being here. This is it's always such a nice thing to come together and to hear your stories and all that. I'll be back here next week. I put a link there to that reading with Afia Atakora and Claire Beams and Kirkland Hamill, and there's a link there to find the whole schedule and all that. So yeah, thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Brian. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Stay healthy, stay optimistic, and keep reading books.
Yes, thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Take care. Thank you.